We're going to start with Professor Matt Rossano. He's a professor and department of head of psychology at Southeastern Louisiana University and also the author of Supernatural Selection, How Religion Evolved, which is fascinating. I want to talk to him about that in a second. But actually, we wanted to interview him about his latest article, The Surprising Effect of Religious Devotion on Suicide Attacks. Professor Rossano, welcome to the Young Turks.
Well, thank you very much. Good to be here.
Great to have you. All right, first, tell us about the research on whether it's religion or ritual that motivates people into, for example, suicide attacks.
Well, right. This was a study that actually came out sometime last year, and what they were really looking at is they were trying to separate religious ritual, like you said, from religious belief. And they were asking the question, well, which is it that seems to be more associated with support for suicide attacks? And that is it participating in rituals, or is it the beliefs of the religion? And they did a very, very extensive cross-cultural study where they looked at Muslims, they looked at Indian Hindus, they looked at Russian Orthodox, just a number of different religions. And in every case that they surveyed, the results were a consistent pattern, and that is support for suicide attacks was much more strongly associated with participating in group rituals. And the religious beliefs, those either didn't have any sort of impact or they had a somewhat negative impact, and that is the more somebody was devoted to whatever the beliefs were or the deities were of the religion, if anything, they tended to be more in opposition to any sort of suicide attacks.
Well, that's really interesting. So let's take the 9/11 guys as an example. So, you know, we were, of course, you naturally assume that they were deeply religious. Now, religious meaning fundamentalists, their own crazy interpretation of the religion, but I don't think a lot of people question their religious fervor. But is this research indicating that that wasn't really what was driving them?
Well, what it suggests is that the stronger motivation was sort of an us versus them mentality. The idea that somehow our group, as we define it, is being threatened by some other group. And, you know, if you think about soldiers, and one of the things they often say about soldiers is they don't necessarily die for freedom or for some great ideals. They die for their buddies. And I think the same kind of mentality is at work here. It's a very, very strong group bonding, and when they feel that their group is somehow challenged, that their group is somehow under threat, then they become increasingly willing to engage in suicide attacks or self-sacrificial acts that they think are going to defend their group against someone else. Now, what seems to be the case is that religious ritual can be especially effective when it comes to building those group identities and building that really, really strong group emotional attachment to your group. Religion isn't unique in that sense. I mean, other, like fraternities and the military, they use ritual kinds of activities as well, but religion may be especially strong at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do we become kind of like bees in the sense that since we're all part of this one group doing this ritual over and over again, we're willing to sacrifice ourselves more for the good of the group, whether it's the army or a religion or whatever it might be?
Yeah, as you engage in group ritual and you have sort of those synchronized movements with other people, you sort of have that sense of getting out of yourself and becoming part of something larger than you. And there's that very strong emotional bond that you create with others and also with whatever it is that the group stands for. And as that strong emotional attachment intensifies, and also as the sense of threat intensifies, where you think that, you know, there are others out there that are trying to destroy your group, then that idea of taking some kind of extreme measures becomes more and more viable.
Right, but this could also be used for good, right? I mean, if you practice a ritual and then that leads to people associating themselves with a group and willing to sacrifice themselves, they don't have to do suicide attacks. It could be like the nuns in Calcutta who helped the poor and sacrificed their own lives to do that in a manner of speaking.
Absolutely. What you're really looking at is you're looking at sort of the dark side of human sociality. We are extraordinarily social creatures. And when we become very, very bonded to social groups and the ideals of that group, that can lead to all kinds of wonderful behaviors. In fact, you know, community depends on ritual activities of some kind or another, groups getting together and, you know, whether it's just sharing a meal or doing whatever it is they do, that's how you create some kind of group identity, and that's just simply part of being human. But sort of the flip side of that is that you can also put those same sort of processes in place in an us versus them kind of mentality, and in a mentality that says that we have to do some kind of extreme things in order to keep our group alive. So there's good and there's bad here, as there almost always are when you're dealing with people.
This wasn't in your article, but as we have this conversation, I think, shouldn't this also lead us to the conclusion that we have to be awfully cautious about who the leaders of these groups are? Because a lot of people with doing these rituals within the groups, whatever group it might be, are surrendering their judgment to some degree to the leader of that group, and so then that leader has the opportunity to do good with it, as Mother Teresa did, for example, or to do very bad things with it, Bin Laden, etc. Shouldn't we scrutinize that position a little bit more and be more cautious of it?
Yeah, I don't think that you can ever relieve people of personal responsibility for what they're doing. Even if they're doing it for, some kind of group cause or because they're strongly bonded emotionally to a group, still, we should expect that individuals use their own minds and they can assess in some kind of rational way what it is they're doing, compare it against some kind of moral system, and have some kind of empathy for people that are in other groups. So no, I don't think you relieve people of personal responsibility. They have to be aware of what they're up to, and they have to go into their groups with their eyes open as much as possible. But I think this does tell us what are the circumstances in which it becomes increasingly likely that people might do extreme things.
You know what, again, as we talk about it more, I think, it's more likely to lead to bad results. The reason is and I'm not absolving them of personal responsibility at all, right? But the more you allow the leader of the group to tell you what you set up this us versus them ideology and tell you what you need to do to sacrifice yourself for the group, the more power that gives the leader. And power almost always corrupts, right? It's a very rare case where it doesn't corrupt. So...
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. I think as soon as you sort of suspect that the leader of your group is trying to identify enemies and maybe is spending more time identifying enemies and talking about the evil that's out there as opposed to the good that our group can do, then that might be a red flag indicator for a thinking person at least that, maybe this group is headed in the wrong direction and maybe I shouldn't be a part of it anymore.
That's interesting. And then finally on this issue, Abu Ghraib, and we're talking to Professor Rossano, he's the author of Supernatural Selection, How Religion Evolved. Abu Ghraib, then, you begin to understand the power of those visuals because that helps insurgents, terrorists, etc., set up that us versus them paradigm so much better, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. So that becomes the evidence that there is a terrible threat out there. And even though you might have some members of your group that are kind of on the fence saying, no, we shouldn't be engaged in violent acts, this goes against some of the more idealistic views of our religion, when you see something like that, that gives credibility to a leader or members of the group that are saying, no, anything goes now. By any means necessary, we have to accomplish this goal because it's us versus them. If they win, we're all destroyed, and we can't have that happen.
Right. And look, to be fair, also on our side, after something terrible happened to us, 9/11, we had a leader who came out and said, you're either with us or against us.
Exactly. Yeah, this is when things start to escalate, and it becomes increasingly difficult to try to have some kind of rational discussion and to try to find some kind of common ground because people become more entrenched, they feel more threatened, they see evidence of it, and then it just becomes us versus them, and it turns into a conflict that is very hard to resolve.
So now that was a discussion on your article, and I love that. But let me just quickly ask you about your book, too, Professor.
Sure.
So how did religion evolve, and how does it evolve supernatural selection? What's the thesis?
Well, basically what I'm trying to do in the book is I'm trying to trace out an evolutionary history of religion. And I think probably there's a number of elements to it. But I think probably the most important message that I try to present in the book is that when you really get down to it, I think what religion is it's what I call a supernaturalizing of social life. And that is, there was a time in our evolutionary history when our brains and our mind evolved to a point where we could envision relationships with individuals that weren't necessarily physically present with us. We could envision relationships with ancestors who had already died. We could envision relationships with animals, our pets, and so forth, that really don't have the capacity to have a real kind of human relationship. But we could construct those kind of relationships in our head. And I think when you start to get that, and these relationships can be very, very real. I mean, when we study them, we see they have the same sorts of psychological effects and physical effects even as real relationships with other humans. When you get to that point where your social world is not just the physically present social world, but it's the world above us in the heavens, the world below us with creatures and animals that we relate to in some fashion, then you've set the stage for developing narratives and mythologies and theologies around those relationships, and I think it sort of goes from there.
Do you discuss how, and I'm sorry, I read the article but not the book, but do you discuss how different religions have competed or evolved to get to the point where they are now, or no?
To a certain degree. I deal mostly with the evolutionary history, not really with the present history of say monotheistic religions versus polytheistic or that sort of thing. But I think that group competition in our past probably does explain why religion is pretty much a universal of humans. I think probably if you go far enough in our evolutionary past, there were religious groups that had this supernaturalized sort of social life versus those who didn't. And I think those with the supernatural view of things, they tended to be more cohesive, more cooperative groups, and they outcompeted the other ones.
Yeah, and I wonder, because there was, of course, thousands of religions, and I wonder what it was about Christianity, Islam, etc., the ones that survived, that gave them that, if you will, evolutionary advantage. Yeah,
well, I think there is something about a monotheistic view that is able to spread itself more easily. It isn't as parochial. When your view of the gods is based on your ancestors, then they are pretty much just associated with you and your group. However, when you say that your God is universal, and he or she or whatever doesn't necessarily belong just to us and our tribe and our family, but it's a universal God, that is one that more easily can be incorporated into other tribes, other ethnic groups' view of things.
So it has an evolutionary advantage in that it could spread easier.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Right. And that's interesting. God, fascinating stuff. All right, the book is called Supernatural Selection, How Religion Evolved, and the article was The Surprising Effect of Religious Devotion on Suicide Attacks. You can find the article on Huffington Post. Professor Rassano, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.